Welcome to the Pilot's Inner Circle on Flight Training Radio, where a good pilot is always learning. Now, here's your host and certified flight instructor extraordinaire, Jason Schappert.
Hey everybody, Jason Schappert here of M0A.com, and welcome to the Pilot's Inner Circle on Flight Training Radio, the only aviation podcast that is not only live, but also good for FAA Wings credit. That's right, Pilot's Inner Circle members get access to the full version of this podcast. And also get an opportunity to earn FAA Wings credit, sort of like CEUs, towards renewing your pilot certificate. So pretty neat stuff there. Guys, this is, like I said, 110% live. If you guys have a question, you can call in right now. The number is 877-537-6704. We'll get you on the call and we can chit-chat about any flight training related question you may have. So 877-537-6704. Call in with your questions. We will get you on the air and answering those flight training related questions. Well, first off, a confession. I am absolutely pooped. And I will tell you why I'm absolutely pooped. Over the past, I've been in Kentucky the past few days. I flew a Cessna 182 with a friend from Central Florida up to Lexington. Beautiful, beautiful flight. And it worked out perfectly because today we're talking about that very topic, which is planning long cross countries. And I just want to share with you the story of my flight and really use that as a segue into what we're talking about. We're in the Cessna 182, great airplane. Every time I fly this airplane, I mean, we are doing great, 125, 130 knots. I mean, it is a awesome airplane. And flying up to Kentucky was no big deal. We had a little bit more of a headwind than I anticipated. We stopped in Clemson, South Carolina. We stopped actually before the mountains. And again, some of you are laughing. I call them mountains. Some of you would call them hills. I think the highest peak we went over was like 6,000 feet. But to a Florida guy, that's a mountain. So it was intense for me. So we stopped. I'm a big fan of fuel. The only time you have too much gas is when you're on fire. So I'm a big fan of stopping and getting gas. Got up there just fine. It was coming home that ended up being the tough part. We left about 12 o'clock. So it's a little bit windier than normal. And I'll tell you, and I'm going to share with you really what I do flight planning wise. I'll share that with you here in a bit and what I did before this flight. But coming back, I crunched all the numbers. Everything was great. We needed one fuel stop. We weren't even pushing it. Everything was just going to be fine. However, we're flying along, and I flight planned with the headwind for 100 knots across the ground, which stinks. I mean, the airplane's meant to go 130 across the ground, so we were going into a stiff wind. However, and those of you who have done quite a bit of flying know, you can crunch those numbers all you want sometimes. However, it doesn't always work out how you planned. We ended up getting up there, getting up to altitude, and from what I read on the winds aloft and everything else, the numbers were just off. My real ground speed was 85 knots. So imagine this. I just planned a whole flight at 100 knots, and I'm really going 85 knots. It doesn't sound that significant, but when you're traveling over 600 miles, it gets to be pretty significant. Everything was fine so far. We made it. We crossed over the mountains. We landed back in Clemson and proceeded to leave Clemson and continue on home. At this point, it was just getting dark. I don't know how many of you have flown through, southern Georgia, but there's not a whole lot out there. It is very, very dark, and on a no-moon night, it's intimidating because it is like flying IFR, like I shared with you guys in last week's episode. It is like flying IFR in those cases sometimes. So we're flying along, and my 85 knot ground speed now drops between 80 and as slow as 75 in some cases. And I'm crunching the numbers again as I'm flying. I got the airplane trimmed up and plenty of time. Still listening to Flight File and crunching the numbers. And the question was, are we going to make it? The answer is yes. Was I going to make it within my 45 minutes of reserve time, FAA requirement? Was I going to make it within Jason's 1 hour extra fuel at the end? And the answer was yes. However, again, I live on that mantra of the only time you have too much fuel is when you're on fire. That sounds funny, but it's very true. I'm a big fan of having a lot of gas in that airplane. So we're flying along, and we're just about to cross over what's called the Okefenokee Swamp. Great name, huh? And again, I'm looking out through the windshield, and it is the black abyss. And I'm thinking, I've been flying for 3 hours. My personal limit, and this is something I do in any airplane, my personal limit in any airplane is 3 hours. My back hurts after flying that long. I've got to go to the bathroom after flying that long. And you know what? 3 hours is a lot of gas to be burned. So we hit that 3 hour mark, and I'm thinking, I've got enough gas to continue on. However, I need to stick to my 3 hour mark, which was totally okay. So we decided to divert to an airport. And you know what? Diversions, that's easy. We've talked about that stuff plenty of times. I busted out my sectional chart, and let me mind you too, before I go any further, I had recently sold my iPad and purchased an iPad mini, and they haven't released the 4G iPad minis yet. So this was a long cross-country flight without my beloved iPad and without my beloved ForeFlight, which, taking it away from somebody, you can really realize what a crutch it can be. But we were doing this the old-fashioned way, and everything was great. Busted out the sectional chart, and I found an airport. Of course, what was I looking for? I was looking for an airport that, number one, had lighting. Found that just by looking at the sectional chart. And number two, had what? Had those tabs around it as well on the sectional chart. So I knew it had fuel. So I found an airport that met both those requirements. Great. Keep in mind, it had just gotten dark. It was about 6 o'clock. Contacted flight following, diverted to that airport. Absolutely no big deal. Everything is fine. Entered in the traffic pattern, landed, everything's great. Unfamiliar airport at night, taking my time taxiing, working around. I see the fuel pumps, I taxi over, and I look. And I'm looking, I stop the airplane, and we get out, and I'm looking at the fuel hose. And the fuel hose is what you would use to fill up a fuel truck. I'm looking, I'm going, there's no way. I mean, where would I even put my credit card? It didn't make sense to me. And so I get online and I jump on my phone online. I'm looking, and this airport is full service only. Well, no big deal. I'll go over to the FBO. Well, of course, all the lights off are in the FBO. Everybody's gone. So here I am at this airport doing the right thing, diverting to go get fuel. And I stopped, and this airport that says it has fuel, well, it does have fuel, but I have no way to access it because it was full service only. So, you know what? No big deal. I jumped on my phone, started searching for nearest airports that also had fuel. And I found another airport. We hopped back in the airplane. We took off. It was 20 miles out to the southwest. We continued to fly through the black Georgia abyss. No offense to my Georgia audience, but it's very dark and scary out there at night. Continued flying that way, landed at this little airport. Taxied our way on in. I saw the fuel pumps this time, and just as I was turning to put my wings over close to the fuel pumps, my landing light lit up this sign, and the sign said, "No fuel. Sorry for any inconvenience." I'm thinking, this really is an inconvenience. I know you're sorry for it, but this stinks. So, and again, picture mentally what's going on in my head at this point. I've landed at one airport. No fuel. I got in the airplane, I hopped in, I went to another airport. Now this airport doesn't have any fuel. It's getting late. I want to eat dinner. I want to get home to my wife. I'm absolutely pooped because I've already been flying all day. I mean, just put yourself in that state of mind. You know, it was a difficult situation. So I stopped the airplane, decided, listen, I need to sit down and I need to really plan this thing out well. So, stopped, and by the way, this goes back to, I mean, picture if you're in a more dire situation. My situation wasn't life or death. We had plenty of gas. It was just a matter of I would feel better if I had more gas. That makes sense? Imagine, though, you're in a more dire situation, that you really need that gas or you're not getting home and you land at an airport like that. And you don't even know if you have enough gas to make it to the next airport to try that. You're going to stay there all night? I mean, what happens in that situation? That's something we're going to talk about in the members-only portion of this. But just putting yourself in those shoes, that's something, a difficult situation. So we stopped. I found another airport, and this time I decided I'm going to call. Somebody has to be there. And sure enough, we called, and we went to the next airport, and they were on the verge of closing up for the night, and we got fuel. The last one to get fuel, and we got out of there and got home. However, I originally planned to get home at 7 o'clock at night. I didn't end up getting home till 11 o'clock at night. And that's the world of flying. That's the world of long cross country sometimes. And a very difficult situation to be in, hopping from airport to airport looking for gas. It sounds so silly, but people get themselves into serious trouble sometimes. Again, going back to the story of, imagine you land at that airport that said it had no fuel. I mean, what do you do in that situation if you really need gas? You're staying there that night. I mean, you're hopefully not going to get up and go flying, especially at night with the gas light on effectively. But I went back and I did some research. That airport that the fuel was out of service, it had no NOTAM. Now, I don't know if you're required to post a NOTAM for something like that, but wouldn't it have been nice? I mean, I got a full flight brief for every single airport along my route of flight. Wouldn't it have been nice to know, hey, that airport, yes, it says it has fuel, but it's not working right now, or they're out of fuel. Wouldn't that be nice if they had a NOTAM like that? Save my time, from going there. So just silly things like that, and that was the extent of my flight. I made the mistake of trusting what I call the tabs on the sectional chart. The sectional chart says there'll be fuel there, so I went there. And you know what? I went to 3 airports and only one of them had gas, and they all had tabs around them showing that they had fuel. But they either did and I didn't have access to it because it was full service only, or they were out of fuel with their nice little no fuel, sorry for any inconvenience note. And again, I don't want to name what airports they are. I'm sure they're all great establishments, and I just happened to be flying a little bit later, and most of these places were closed. But it's a very difficult situation to find yourself in. So what I want to segue into now is what I check and what I do before these long flights, and then going back to reflect on the flight I just explained to you about what I could have done better. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions, that number to call in is 877-537-6704. We'd be happy to get you on the call to chit-chat. Also, you can hit me up on Twitter. It's at M0A, M-Z-E-R-O-A, and also on Facebook. I have both those pages open now, too, so any questions you can ask them that way as well. So literally before a big flight like that, I always do a flight brief. I do an old-fashioned flight brief, though. I like to call in on the phone. I know ForeFlight does this stuff for me. I know there's all sorts of great websites that'll get a great flight brief. But there's something about just talking to another individual and getting their opinion, their professional opinion, on helping you make a go and no-go decision. Another great reason is all those conversations are recorded. So if you were to get into a pickle, if you were to bust a TFR or something like that they didn't tell you about, you can say, listen, I'm sorry I busted this TFR, but when I called and got a flight brief, no one ever told me about a TFR. Let's go and listen to the recording, because all that stuff is recorded. It's a great way to cover your butt, in that case. I began, even before getting a flight brief, checking the TAFs, even checking the METARs, but especially checking the prog charts, the prognostic charts, 3 to 4 days out. I wanted to see the trends. I wanted to see what was happening. When I was, I had never flown into the Lexington airport before. So I began checking the METARs at the time I was expected to land. 3 and 4 days ahead of time. So I was expected to arrive in Lexington around 1, 2 p.m. their time. I began every day, 1 or 2 p.m., checking their, their METARs, watching for the trends, checking the prognostic charts, praying that high pressure moves into the area so I can have a great flight. Just really studying the weather patterns. Does that make sense? And focusing on that so I am, well versed when I'm flying up there. And it sounds silly, but there's more to flying than just pre-flight in the airplane, hopping in and going. There's a lot that goes into, especially long flights like this in a general aviation aircraft. And they are an absolute blast. They're a huge confidence booster. There's nothing more thrilling than, flying yourself in a small airplane such a great distance and seeing all these cool airports, and you meet such neat people. It really is, a great experience. And in regards to the briefing, I always get an abbreviated briefing the night before. Call them up on the phone. Hey, what's it going to be like tomorrow? Chit-chat with them. Figure out what's it going to be like for your route of flight. Let them, make the, hey, it's going to be marginal VFR. Hey, it's VFR. Hey, it's IFR. Let them help you make your go and no-go decision. And then obviously the day of, I like to contact them usually when I'm driving out to the airport. I have about a 20-minute drive out to my airport. So, it is a great time to get on the call with them, put them on speakerphone, set the phone down so I can focus on driving, but also just listening to what's happening. I already know most of what they're going to tell me because I've done this research for the past 3 or 4 days. However, it's nice to hear them confirm that. It's nice to hear any changes they've made. Really, really, good stuff. So, and then I want to segue into this real quick here is, in regards to my story I just explained to you, what could I have done better in that situation? Obviously we weren't in a dire need. We weren't going to run out of gas. I know for a fact we could have made the airport we were going to within our FAA night reserves, even within my Jason 1-hour reserve, and everything would have been A-okay. However, I'm not a big fan of pushing it. What if I went to Ocala and Ocala was socked in IFR? What if it started raining? What if the lights weren't working at Ocala? There's so many things that could have gone wrong, and then here I am with just an hour's worth of fuel left. And now I'm in panic mode thinking, where on earth do I go? I like having gas. So I don't regret my decision to stop early. What I regret is how do I say it? The lack of diversion planning. That's almost like an oxymoron, though, because who really plans a diversion? What I wish I would have done better is learned more about the airports within, say, 20 nautical miles of either side of my course. So a 40 nautical mile rectangle of my course, 20 on each side, basically. And just really learned what they had to offer, what their hours were, if they had fuel, if they didn't, figuring out their frequencies and their runways, just making up a little cheat sheet of all this sort of stuff. Because again, you plan a diversion, and my diversion was on the fly. I picked an airport. It met my 2 criteria, which was, does it have lights and a beacon? Yes. And does it have fuel? And I looked at that by telling the little tabs on the sectional chart. Yes, my sectional chart was current, but it doesn't matter when you get there and they're out of fuel. Or when you get there and, yeah, they have fuel, but it's full service and nobody's there to provide you with that fuel. So just interesting things to think about, and hopefully you don't find yourself in that sort of situation, because it could put you in a real pickle if it's a dire situation. So that's what I wish I would have done, and I'm going to start doing from now on, is literally learning all I can about the airports around me, because I'm not familiar with the Georgia area. I'm not familiar with airports in between me and Kentucky. Now I am. But on those long flights, and when I say long flights, really anything over 50 nautical miles is a long flight nowadays, focusing and learning all you can about those airports around you. So guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then I'm going to answer your questions. That number to call in is 877-537-6704. I'm happy to answer your questions. I got a few coming in via email, a few coming in via Twitter, and it looks like we got one on the line, and we will we'll check all that out after this quick commercial break, and then we will answer your questions. Be back in just a minute. Are you prepared for an engine failure on takeoff? What if there was runway remaining? What if there isn't? Would you know what to do if you lost radio communications in IFR conditions? My newest book, In-Flight Emergencies, a step-by-step guide to handling the unexpected, will cover all of this and more. Readers learn about a topic such as engine failures on takeoff. Then at the end of the chapter, there's a URL where they can go and watch a video of an actual engine failure on takeoff and see how the pilot applied the skills mentioned in the book. We're adding videos you love to the books you need, because a good pilot is always learning. Check out the book at inflightemergencies.com.
Hey there, quick question. What would you do if you lost your logbook? Imagine having to go back in time to track down all of those hours, dates, aircraft flown, and airports landed at. It's near impossible. Trust me, I've done it. Welcome to Runway Log, the best online pilot logbook that lets you log flights on your iPhone, iPad, or Android device. Attach photos to certain entries and see where you've been with our interactive map. Best of all, it's backed up every hour and fully exportable to CSV or PDF. Runway Log has your back. It even sends reminders when your flight review is due. Don't wait another second. Start your free trial of Runway Log today. Visit runwaylog.com.
The Pilot's Inner Circle is more than just a ground school. It's a community.
And I want to thank you for all that you're doing. You're going to grow this show. You're going to be the most popular and best instructor in the nation because you focus on people and learning. You're sincere, you have integrity, and you have character. And your wife is a great gal, too.
Members get a chance to interact with me and others each and every week live in the radio shows like the one you're listening to now, or every Monday evening in the mock check rides and weekly workshop webinars that we do.
Jason really does a wonderful job teaching his students all the basics you're going to need to help pass your written test as well as your practical test. Once you're a member, the online seminars every week. This is really a big key as far as my training was concerned, because there's those nagging questions, exactly what does this do, what does that do?
With a 100% pass rate and over 1,000 check rides passed, what's not to love about the Pilot's Inner Circle? Members also get FAA Wings credit for listening to this very radio show you're listening to now, in addition to the extended version. So what's not to love? Visit pilotsinnercircle.com to become a member today. All right, we are back. Welcome back to Flight Training Radio, the Pilot's Inner Circle. A few calls on the line, a few Twitter comments and emails sneaking in here. Before we go too much further, let's get on the line my newest M0A friend, longtime M0A friend, seen his name quite a few times. Rick from California, my friend, you are live. How are you doing?
I am doing great, and frankly, most of the reason I'm calling is just to publicly thank you for all your help.
Awesome.
I passed my oral a little over a week ago, and I go on my check ride on Thursday.
Awesome, my friend. So how'd the oral exam go? Everything went well?
The oral went surprisingly well. Some of the things that, and maybe that I was not as good on as I should have been, is Class E airspace. Mm-hmm. I fly out of Van Nuys in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is, BCD out here.
Right.
So I really didn't study that a lot. But you had mentioned on your cross country is that you start way ahead of time checking the weather and METARs and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I am so neurotic, and I think you probably instilled a lot of this in me, that even when I go up for a training flight, I'm going up Thursday for my check ride, I have been checking the Weather Channel going back a week.
Oh, yeah.
Because the last thing I want is a crosswind and try to do a short field landing in a crosswind.
No.
I want calm.
Right. No, you're exactly. And a lot of people think, the Weather Channel, I have to use aviationweather.gov. I have to use these real aviation websites. There's nothing wrong with going on weather.com and looking at, the 5-day forecast. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just as good a weather as you're going to get anywhere else,
And I've been checking the METARs at Van Nuys Airport I do it every day. I know I'm going up approximately 9:30 on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless the weather changes, 9:30's weather report for today is going to be pretty much like Thursday, unless we have changing weather.
Yeah.
And again, you've made me neurotic, and I appreciate that.
As long as that's a good thing, you know.
Well, that's a good thing. If I go up for an hour training flight and I don't have 3 hours worth of fuel, why not fill the tank?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Again, the only time you have too much gas is when you're on fire. You know?
There you go.
You're
anyway,
exactly
I'll report back to you hopefully with good news sometime Thursday.
Absolutely, Rick. That's awesome. I hope to chat with you more tonight on the webinar. Okay.
Terrific. Thank you, sir.
Cool, Rick. Have a great day. See ya.
You too.
Cool. Awesome, guys. Rick, what a cool guy. All right, let's keep moving here. Twitter comments real quick. Steve, reading yours now. Steve, great point here. Steve's first tweet here talked about the cheat sheet method is what he's calling it. And basically what Steve's explaining is drawing an airport map or an airport diagram in relation to how you are going to see it. For example, you can print out a taxiway diagram all you want. However, how are you going to see the runways? By that I mean if you're approaching from the north, draw the airport as you are going to see it looking through your windshield. You know, showing 36 this way, 27 this way, and so on. And I draw a little stick airplane on there too to show how I'm approaching that airport. So that helps me, work that out mentally in my head. Let's see. Steve also mentioned he does, takes notes, important things like frequencies, nav aids, runway info, super helpful. And you're exactly right, Steve. And again, picture that. Let's say I did that for my long flight now. You know, every airport, 20 nautical miles, either side of my course, 40 nautical miles altogether, and did that, for diversion purposes. I had the frequencies. Does this airport have lights? Does this airport have fuel? And a great comment from Larry here, he talked about, he literally calls airports, the day ahead to make sure they do have fuel. It sounds so silly, but you can look online, you can check for flight, but sometimes they don't have this up-to-date stuff. A lot of times these places, their businesses, you got to understand, they may not want to advertise that they don't have fuel because that may turn away your business. Well, duh. But Larry also brought up a great point. He was reading an AOPA survey, and 78% of pilots they found overestimate fuel. 78% of people overestimate their fuel. I mean, that's scary to think about. Running out of gas has got to be one of the worst things to have to explain to the NTSB reporter. I just miscalculated. I mean, a terrible, terrible, thing. I mean, and again, I underestimated the headwind. Well, I don't know if I underestimated it. I worked with the numbers that were given to me. But from now on, I've now learned, because a good pilot's always learning, I've now learned I'm going to take those winds aloft and I'm going to add 25% to them now. And that's assuming it's a headwind. Obviously, if it's a tailwind, I'm probably going to have subtracting. But just knowing that conditions can change. I mean, literally, I went from flight planning 100 knots to truly going 85 knots across the ground. When you're traveling 600 miles, that's significant. That's make or break, literally, in that sort of situation. Every knot is make or break in that sort of situation. Let's see. Bob asked a great question here via Twitter, and I've got one via email. And let's see if I have anything else sneaking in here. That looks like it. So let me take care of these. Bob asked a great question. He's doing a long cross country on Wednesday and wants to know, when requesting flight following on a cross country, should he indicate the final destination or the next waypoint with the course change? For example, he's going to be flying, to a VOR and then heading onto his course. Bob, the best thing you can do in that situation, and I'll use your real waypoints. You're going from MSP to Albany via Joliet, Illinois. What I would do in requesting flight following is, hey, this is such and such, just off of MSP. request VFR flight following to Albany via the Joliet, however you say it, sorry, VOR. I'm heading here via this. Yes, you're VFR, and that's fine, but I'm heading here via this VOR, just so they know, because if you tell them you're going from MSP to ALB, or to make it even simpler for everybody, from point A to point B, they're going to draw a line on their radar screen from point A to point B. And when they see you straying from that course, they're going to call you up and say, hey, 14 Echo Foxtrot, I notice that you're a little bit off course. Suggest a right turn, 20 degrees to get back on course. And then you have to go on explaining, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. There's no need to. Go back and tell them, hey, I'm going from point A to point B via this route. And just let them know that ahead of time so they know what you're doing. And that way they know what airspace you're going to be going through. I mean, you're going to be going through some decent airspace. I'm sure you've already looked at a lot of it, but you're going to be flying through some good airspace. So make sure they know what you're up to from that circumstance. Let's see, quick question here via email. This came in from Bill. Bill and I did correspond via email here. Won't share the airports here, but Bill was flying from, we'll say again, point A to point B. His planned altitude was 4,500 feet. The flight briefer told him to expect few clouds at 3,000 feet for a part of the flight. Cool, sounds good so far. After takeoff, he established VFR flight following. That scattered layer quickly became overcast. Don't we love how that happens? Again, you read one thing, scattered to few clouds, and then it becomes another thing, an overcast layer. Again, always planning for the worst. I hate to be a pessimist, but it's just true sometimes. He was while deciding whether or not to divert, he realized he had entered some Class D airspace, which tops out at 3,200 feet, which he originally planned to overfly. The controller did not hand him off or warn him of the airspace. He landed at his destination, which the weather cleared up. He put in parentheses here. He called his instructor, and she informed him that he was lucky the Class D airspace was not active on weekends. So he did luck out there. His question is, if it was active when he approached, was he supposed to be in contact with the tower and flight following simultaneously? Or was he okay because he was under flight following? And lastly, would the controller have handed him off to the tower? Well, Bill, first off, glad that the flight worked out and everything was fine, and glad that airspace was closed. This is the thing. You first off do not have to talk to the tower and flight following simultaneously. You either need to be talking to one or the other. Obviously, I don't want to be talking to flight following in that case. Flight following is going to do one of two things. They're either going to, one, hand you off to that tower, and that may sound crazy, but I've had it happen. That is only going to happen, 10% of the time. That very rarely happens. You'd have to be at a fairly low altitude, which might be in your case, to have that happen. However, flight following 90% of the time is going to get on the phone and call that Class Delta tower and say, hey, this is Bill from Jack's Approach. Just wanted to let you know that 512 Romeo is going to be passing through your airspace. He's talking to me. And Class Delta guy is going to come back and say, sure, that's fine, send him on through. And you're not even going to know it happened, but they're coordinating for you that entire way. So the proper thing you did, which was to stick with flight following. There is nothing ever wrong with clarifying. You could always clarify with them and say, hey, November 1, 2, 3, 4, I just want to make sure I'm cleared into this airspace. I do that a lot with restricted airspace. There's a lot of restricted airspace in Florida. Anytime I'm heading out towards the Daytona area or something like that, I'm always calling up, hey, this is Cessna 512 Romeo, just checking on the status of restricted area 2905. And they, 2905 is cold. Oh, thank you, 512 Romeo, just to check up. It's still my duty to double check. Now, on flight following, they're going to coordinate and do all that for you. But you got to remember, VFR flight following is not it's given on a time permitting basis, meaning they don't have to give you VFR flight following. Their main duty in life is for IFR traffic. Okay? VFR is on a time permitting basis. So their IFR traffic is going to take precedence over everything. So you have to be ready for that. But just really, really great questions. Bob, Steve, Bill, Rick, guys, really appreciate making this very interactive and participating. Guys, we are going to wrap it up now, and we're going to move on to now the members-only portion of this podcast, which will be available to everybody here in to my members, in just a few hours. I'll get that up on the Ground School Academy website, so you guys can listen to that and submit for your Wings credit. Don't forget, members, tonight is our weekly workshop webinar. We'll be chit-chatting in there a little bit and just talking more in depth on various topics. That is for members only. And hey, if you're not a member and you'd like to become a member to get the rest of this podcast, access to over 220 full HD flight training videos, weekly webinars and their recordings, and just a bunch of great stuff, go to pilotsinnercircle.com right now to become a member, and you'll get access to all that great stuff we've been talking about throughout the show. So anyways, guys, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for all you do for myself, my beautiful wife, and our wonderful business. You guys are the reason we get up and do what we do every day. It's for you, to make you safer and create better pilots. So with that, guys, have a great rest of your Monday, and remember that a good pilot is always learning. Have a great day, guys. See ya.